What's going on, everybody? This is Brandon Hill, and today we're going to go over how to use the mute and solo buttons in Maschine. And these are two simple buttons, but they are so critical to my workflow, and I want to share with you how to use them, and I want to share 3 examples of how I use them in my workflow as well. So let's get into it. Okay, first I'm going to break down the basics of the mute and the solo button. So this is a little beat that I made right here. Let's start with the solo button. So when you use the solo button, basically you hold it and you could use it on a group level, or you could use it on the pad level, and it is going to solo that group or that pad. So let me demonstrate. So if I have this beat going here and I hit solo, I could solo at this group. To take it off, I could do that. I could solo out this melody sound right here. Okay. And then I could also use it to solo the pads as well. So if I do this, imagine I solo out this group and I just want to hear my kick. I could hit that. Now I could just hear the kick. Let's say I just want to hear this open hi-hat here. Or the shaker loop. Okay. And to take solo off, all you have to do is hit this note again. And then for the groups, you could just hit the group again, and now everything's back on. Alternatively, if I have this going, I could hit solo, and you see this all on button right here? If I hit it, it's going to turn all the sounds on in this group. So that's a quick way to do it. So let me take that off. Now let's go to the mute button. And the mute button operates in the same way as the solo button, but as the name would imply, it's going to mute whatever you hit. So you could mute groups like this. I can mute everything. I could turn this back on. Okay. Or let's say I have this on. You could also mute individual pads as well. So let's say I want to do this. And you could unmute by holding it, bringing everything back in. Also, you could hit the all on button like you could with the solo button. So this would turn everything back on. Okay, so that's the basics. And one thing that can speed up your workflow with soloing or muting is to pin the solo or mute button. You see how I'm soloing this, and in my display, it goes off? So when I was demonstrating this, I would hit solo and I would hit this. Or I would hit this, and I have to hold it this whole time. So you don't have to do that. What you can do, solo, hit solo, and you see how this says solo up here and it's grayed out? If you hit this here, it's going to pin the solo button. So now solo is going to remain activated until I hit this again. So now I could start soloing this, I could start soloing that, or this. Okay. And then if I take this off, solo is deactivated. If I turn it back on, it's there. Same thing with the mute. I have mute pinned already, so when I hit mute, it's going to have it activated until I hit this mute button again. Okay, so really useful things. So we've demonstrated how you can use the solo and the mute buttons on the pads and the groups. But one other place that you could use these buttons is in the mixer view. So let's say I have this going here. I could use the solo button to solo my drums or my bass or my melody. And if I have this soloed and I want to hear like the bass and melody together, I can hit mute and it'll take that off. And then I can bring that back in, all right? And if I want to mute it, I can hit mute. And if I go down into the pad level, I could start muting stuff like this as well. Bring that back. I could also solo in here if I just want to hear that. And I could take it off, okay? So those are some other ways that you could work with the mute and solo buttons. Okay, now to talk about how I use this in my workflow. So it's one thing to teach you what everything does. I want to also show you examples of how I personally use it in my workflow. And I use the mute and the solo buttons primarily in 3 areas, and that's mixing and mastering, arranging, and live performing. So for example, if I'm mixing and mastering, I might solo this group right here. Let's imagine that I solo my bass, and this is what I actually did on this beat. So right now I have the bass soloed. If I go into it, I would use it for mixing and mastering, because for something like this, I might throw on Neutron 4 and just check out what the EQ is looking like on the bass. And let me just pull it on my other screen right here. So imagine that I have this, and if I wanted to take out some of this top end, I could do this by applying one of these filters right here and just seeing what can I cut off until it starts affecting the sound. So I don't want to do that here, but I wanted to demonstrate. But I did do that on something like, let's go to this. So this little atmospheric sound right here, I used Neutron 4 and I soloed it like this, like you see right here. And I don't know why this keeps... So I took out the low end so it could free up my kick and my bass. So that's one way I would use it. Another way I could use it, let's imagine that I have my open hi-hat soloed and I apply something like an LFO. Or let's say, rather than an LFO, I auto pan this. I can hear what it sounds like if I start going to the right, if I start going to the left. So that's something that the solo button could really help with. Okay, now we could talk about arrangement. So let me take this off and take everything off. So I have my whole beat here, and before I laid this out, I just had one scene, and I had all of this activated here. And I had this full drum kit activated, but I copied it multiple times like this when I started to create my scenes. So what I would do, originally there was just one pattern here and I copied it. So I would play this and I would start muting everything, right? And I might take this out right now. I don't feel like I want it. But to help with arranging, I would start bringing in these sounds one by one to kind of think about how I want the song to progress. So let's say this is my intro, and then I want to start bringing in the open hi-hat. So this might be scene 2, for example, right? And then in scene 3, I might bring in this rim. And if I like this in my scene, I would delete all of this. And this is the scene that I would work with here. And then I would use the next pattern to create the next scene, right? So let me delete that, undo that, and turn this all back on. So that's how I would use it with arranging, is you kind of mute things or solo things, you bring elements in one by one, you turn patterns off one by one, and you get a feel for what you want your arrangement to sound like, and then you just start making scenes for all of the versions that you came up with. And then you could start arranging it in the song view like this. Okay. Lastly, I like to use the mute and the solo buttons combined with the lock state buttons to live perform. So I haven't made a video on the lock state buttons yet, but basically if I hit lock, it's going to lock everything about my song right now. It'll lock what's playing, what's muted, all the mixing and mastering and parameters. So if I play this and I start to mute stuff, for example, if I hit this lock button, it's going to bring me back to where I just was. See? So I like to use this for live performing because I'll hit this lock button and I'll start to mute and solo things. For example, if I wanted to create like a breakdown and then a build up into a drop, you could do something like this. So I have this activated. I'm going to turn that off. I will go to here and then I will mute. And let's say that this is the breakdown. So I'm just kind of vibing out and live performing. I'll bring this back in. I could use note repeat on something like this. Like, this might be a bad example, but if I use it to create a snare roll, I could do something like this. And then you could bring everything back in. And I didn't execute the best on that example, but you get the idea, right? You hit the lock button to lock everything in. You start using the mute buttons to take elements out and bring them back in. And it's kind of like you're live performing an arrangement. So that's fun to play around with on your own. It's hard to execute live, as you just saw, but you're playing around at home and you're making a cool live performance. So that is the deep dive on the solo and mute buttons. Like I said, they're very simple buttons in the Maschine, easy to overlook, but they are so critical to my workflow when I'm making beats or when I'm mixing and mastering or when I'm live performing. If you like this tutorial, let me know in the comments and like and subscribe. I really want to grow this channel and your support means everything for that. And I will get working on the next tutorial for you all, so stay tuned. All right, I'll see you then.